Welcome back, everybody, to the BRUBBLE podcast, a podcast exploring young voices and perspectives from in and around the Brussels bubble. And today is a special day. The year is almost ending. It's a month out from the end of the year, the last day of November, and people at this time of the year always make their top 10 lists, which is a great fun practice, and it's especially fun when you look at the top 10 news stories of the year that was. So this is going to be a bit more of a serious topic, exploring, but a serious topic with some conversation, debate around it. And as always, I'm joined by some, I'd say, very serious men around me, Nikos and Joao. Do you want to introduce yourselves very quickly?
Yes, so I work in the EU bubble, in the European Commission. I'm 26 years old. I come from Greece. Very happy to be back. Thanks again for the invite. But here I'm very happy to just share my own personal opinions and just discuss with friends about topics that interest us and interest Europe and the world.
I'm super happy to have you guys back here too, because I try to do every so often one of these episodes where we, take a more sporadic look at these pressing issues we see around us, and you two are great. Typically, Julien would also be joining us here. He might join halfway through, but we have his thoughts anyways. Myself, I'm Simon van Hoeven. I work in the Brussels bubble as well for one of our big tech companies around here. One of the good ones, I would say, personally, but I'm also getting paid to say that, so yeah. And I'm happy to share my perspectives as well. And also, finally, last but not least, somebody who we're very happy to see back on his feet around here.
Pretty much on my feet again, yes. Thank you so much. It's a great thing for me for being back here with you guys. I've been missing this type of activities. My name is Joao Ponch. I work also for the European Commission. I work for DG Grow, and I deal mainly with internal market affairs, more specifically with barriers to the internal market. I'm really, really excited about this discussion because making top 10 lists, especially about such interesting topics like the ones that we have here today, it will be super, super fun. Stay engaged.
And we know it'll be fun because we did this last year as well. And as a special surprise, should I pull up what we talked about last year? So just, to kick off the conversation, we'll spend like 2 minutes on this. Our top 10 of last year, number 1, Russia-Ukraine war, then energy security, then inflation, NATO enlargement at 4, food security at 5, which I didn't even look at this year, Conference on the Future of Europe at 6, US midterms at 7, the trend of polarization, number 8, a great shout by us, I would say. Number 9, Hungary rule of law funding cuts, and 10, EU enlargement. Looking at 2022's list, any thoughts, any reflections from the last few months we've seen around us? Did we hit the mark?
I think with these kind of lists, there's always a degree of hit and miss, but I would say to a very large extent, there were a lot of hits. Russia-Ukraine war is still as prevalent. Energy security and just the entire climate agenda continues to be at the forefront of European discussion. Inflation as well, the cost of living crisis for Europeans everywhere, as well as in the United States and Canada. NATO enlargement, EU enlargement as well. And just, I think what we've severely underestimated is the trend of polarization. And I think what I can say about that is there's always things that you know that you don't know, and that things that you don't know that you don't know. And I think one of those things was the unexpected regional wars that have started in 2023 that have augmented and amplified that trend even further. And I think if we look at the gallops for elections everywhere in Europe, but especially for European elections, we see that this is a constant variable that we have to account for.
Paralleling that ancient Greek wisdom of your forefathers, right?
And I guess it's going to be very interesting for us to also analyze our list from last year and try to understand which are the troubles or the issues that remain, and will they change order or not? Are they part of a bigger picture? So this is something that we will find out.
Yeah, because it was also really interesting to see some really specific nods we gave it to last year, and for me it's interesting to see how some of these trends have carried on, but in different directions. So for instance, Conference on the Future of Europe, it wasn't really on any of our lips this year, but a lot of the ideas it brought up we're seeing kind of formulate into real issues that
have weight
around us. I think just the ongoing debate about representation and about democracy and the powers of the member states within the European Commission, especially foreign policy mechanisms and stuff like that. But I guess given a quick look at 2022, we got to look to what was the future this year, 2023. So the way we've done this, I've gathered 25 of the top stories and themes from around the year, and I've given Joao and Nikos at least a good amount of time to prepare, which they definitely took advantage of. But yeah, I captured a lot of the trends, but some of us have taken some liberties of rewriting some of these trends as well. But what we're going to do is from number 1 to number 10, we're going to tell you first what we thought individually the top 10 trends were, 1 being most important, 10 being important, but 10 for most important. And then we're going to collectively try to come together and make this 1 to 10 list again. The official BRUBBLE podcast, top 10 of 2023.
Let's go.
Yes. Would you like to start, Joao?
Me.
With your...
Me.
Because it's definitely...
the person who created all the chaos.
Yes. Sorry for the up and down. Would you like to go through really quickly? Maybe just list off your list. Don't go too much into depth in your thinking. We'll get to that later.
Okay. Just going to explain something. I tried to do an exercise of merging some of the topics together because I do believe that most of them are important, but it become even more important when you combine them and have a greater picture of the situation. And this is something that can lead us to some clues for the future. So, starting from the 10th place, I chose the US midterms, then Brazil versus Argentina, which I see this in the perspective of a political clash of ideas, and both economically and socially, and as well as in international affairs. The French pension reform. In 7th place, NATO enlargement. In 6th place, China and the world. In 5th place, the AI Act. In 4th place, Africa's Coups. In 3rd place, the Israel-Hamas conflict. In 2nd, 2024 EU Elections Prelude. And 1st place, economy and climate.
Yeah, and I remember when you were doing it, you were talking to me and you were saying it's kind of hard to place all these themes together. And I think this tells, when I was creating this as well, I had the idea that this year, instead of there being huge headlines, which there was a lot of interconnected, undercurrents, which really pushed forth a lot of events we saw. I guess kind of what you were hinting at, Nikos. Mm-hmm. And talking about that hinting at, would you like to introduce your quick list, or should I go first?
Yeah, you know what? Why don't you go first? Because I have a list.
There we go. So my list, I'll go from bottom up again. 10th place, I had the 2024 EU Elections Prelude. A bit late in the year, this really caught momentum, but late enough to put on to 10th. Although this is very closely combated with nuclear energy, which unfortunately didn't make the cut, but might be, if you guys argue. Number 9th, Africa's Coups. 8th, Israel-Hamas conflict. 7th, China and the world. 6th, Ukraine reconstruction and EU enlargement. 5th, the AI Act and other international AI regulatory approaches. 4th, NATO enlargement. 3rd, inflation and cost of living. 2nd, the right-wing wave. And 1st, sadly again, the Russia-Ukraine war. So a bit of a similar top few to last year, but I think the major trends have caught forward. Should we hear from Julien first, or are you ready to go?
Let's do Julien, actually.
So Julien is our very, how would we call him, French opinionated friend. He runs the French Dispatch, I wouldn't say fiery, an authoritative newsletter giving you the top headlines from around France and international affairs. So he's always been our bit of a French correspondent, but he has a great knowledge of the EU affairs. Do you think I did him justice there?
You absolutely did. I'm just looking at the list in complete shock and awe that the French pension reform is not...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, well, quickly listing off his list for the audio listeners. And if you're listening on audio, you can also watch us on YouTube and subscribe there as well, please.
So Spotify.
Yes, and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts as well.
We are everywhere.
Yes. Taking over. 10th, speaking about taking over, entering the EU, according to Julien, was Croatia, which he thought was 10th in importance. 9th, Julien's pick was Ukraine reconstruction and EU enlargement. 8th was specifically the Polish elections. 7th was the 2024 elections prelude. 6th was in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Green Industrial Plan, which I think I was tempted to include as well when I saw this pick. I think it's an underrated pick, as it was last year when we created a list as well. 5th, the Israel-Hamas conflict. 4th, the AI Act. 3rd, the inflation and cost of living crisis, as some would call it. 2nd, the right-wing wave. And 1st, the Russia-Ukraine war. An interesting little
Very
mixture of
interesting,
ideas.
very Eurocentric, and I like his perspective. But I guess
But we are sitting in Brussels, right?
we do have a bias. But I think he really took the very strong European perspective, and it's a pity he's not here to defend it, because there's some great picks. I agree, a lot of underrated stuff.
And if there's some kind of deal breaker, I'll kind of push his voice into here. But we'll see how it goes. Or we'll give him a call,
Yeah.
And Trump's important meeting he had today. Finally, Nikos, somebody, you can't keep getting away with it. Your very fought out list.
Yes, indeed. And that's not a diss, by the way. So I'm actually going to start from the top and make my way to the bottom, because that's how my mental thought process went. So I'm going to go number 1 with inflation and the cost of living. Number 2, migration. Number 3, Russia-Ukraine war. Number 4, the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Number 5, the US Republicans and generally the internal affairs of the US. Number 6, Russia. Number 7, China. Number 8, climate. And I would add to this also, sort of in parentheses, energy. Number 9, we've put Nagorno-Karabakh, but in my head it's just relations, geopolitical relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the 10th is the 2024 EU election prelude. And the only reason I started from top to bottom is because I think all these topics from 1 through 9 reflect very importantly on the 10th. So I think that sort of encapsulates all the other topics.
Fair enough. I like how you kind of wrapped up with a bow. As we go into our own list, I see that there's less agreement than last year. Because last year we all had the same number 1. We had practically the same number 2. It was only the bottom half that was kind of conflated. Whereas this year, my number 1 isn't even represented in Joao's list. What's up with that?
True.
Which was the Russia-Ukraine war.
It's not that I do not consider it important. I just thought that it became something that is more or less still present, that I think we should I should place it, give priority to other stuff. And with the other stuff that I placed there, I can even mention what is happening in Russia, as we are going to see afterwards.
So how
because there is a lot of Russian influence on the stuff that I'm going to mention.
Right. Because it was kind of hard, like I was saying, to take the themes away from the events, right? Or look at the events only and not at the larger themes this year. But how do you want to approach this list agreement? Should we look at what we all have on the list first and then kind of pick away? Or is there things you will die on a hill to get on there?
But
I suggest for us to construct it from bottom up.
But not every list, because we unfortunately don't have time for that. I think we can grab some big headlines.
Let's do this. Let's go around the table and each suggest one we're really keen to see in there.
Or let's agree on a few of them, because there are some stuff that we have in our list and we can agree the position already.
Let's just go around the table and then knock off the easy ones that we think there will be agreement. So, starting you, Nikos, what has to be in there for you?
How many? 1, 2, 3?
Just one, and then we'll go around like that.
I'm gonna go with migration.
Because this is an interesting shout, because I didn't personally put in migration. I kind of supplemented it the right-wing wave, right? And you did kind of similar. I think Julien did similarly as well. Why did you go for migration overwards? Because you could argue the right-wing wave also, encompasses ideas of, frustration of cost of living, frustration of, EU, bureaucracy and stuff like that, government spending, et cetera, et cetera. Why migration specifically?
I've been saying this for a while now, that migration is a dark horse and a Trojan horse in a way topic in terms of the EU, because despite the fact that migration, number one, is a normal part of history, and number two, in Europe especially, it's necessary. The way, unfortunately, that the current situation is unfolding, given the fact that we have not yet agreed on a common European migration and asylum pact, means that a lot of countries are fighting on their own. Some countries, which are countries where migrants want to end up in, suffer from certain problems. Other countries that are on the front line suffer from certain others. But one thing that seems to be a trend in all of those countries is that it is pushing the electorate right wing, and that's undeniable. If you look at the big coalition partners across Europe, minor coalition partners across European governments, entire European governments that are now moving more and more right wing, the more center right flirting with the more right and the more edges of the ideological spectrum, because they see a portion of their vote being eaten out by this. This problem will only become more and more prevalent as we enter the European elections, and especially because if you follow elections all across European states, not just member states, the EU 27, but across other European countries as well that are not EU members, but for instance maybe NATO members, you see that this issue is coming again and again and again. And unfortunately, if we don't treat it with, number one, the attention that it requires, and I think number two, the seriousness of getting together and saying, look, we need to find common ground here, because if we don't and we're all on our own, this will only continue to get worse. And for that reason, I think it is a topic that simply cannot be ignored.
I think you make great points there. I'll give it to you in a second, Joao. But my argument would be here. I like the fact that the right-wing wave encompasses that trend, but I also feel like it also encompasses other trends which are equally important to this trend. Stuff like increasing polarization, which we had on the list last year. I didn't really represent properly here, but also inflation, cost of living. Because I feel if we put migration on here, we automatically must also put on inflation and cost of living.
We absolutely have to, and they're two separate issues. I think.
And we can't summarize them as a right-wing wave.
No, of course not, because also I don't think there is, on migration, there is a strong degree of agreement that amongst a lot of right-wing movements in Europe that there needs to be a stronger European border. But on inflation and cost of living, there are a lot of different ideas being floated. So I think treating them as uniform diminishes their importance, and they're both important.
I think that's a good way to get around the right-wing wave issue here. Joao, thoughts? And where would you rank them? I'm going to give you the honor.
Well, just a little bit of a note on what Niko said. I agree with the importance of the migration, although I had a little bit of a different exercise, because as Niko's mentioned, he referred migration and the European elections. We understand that not only on the context of a major European Parliament elections, but on elections in Europe as a general, migration is a huge topic. And it has been the fault of sometimes some of the governments falling. And most of the coalition, as Niko was mentioning, they have to have in mind how they are going to address, and most likely in a more restrictive way, the migration issue. So what I mean is, I gave a lot of importance to the 2024 EU Prelude because it merges together two of the important topics. I don't want to take the importance from them, but it's a fact. Migration and right-wing waves are connected a lot, and it will shape the way that the European elections, both nationally and in European Parliament as a whole, will take place next year. And so I believe that we could, in a way, try to merge them and encompass them in the EU Elections Prelude.
I do think there is an argument, though, what Nikos was saying earlier, to give them their separate, kind of run for the money, because I think it'll have larger implications than just the EU elections. As you were hinting yourself, even a lot of domestic elections, especially in the year past, which is what we're looking at, have been really influenced by these things. Like, look at the Dutch election, which just wrapped up. That was really based off these two key factors.
The Swedes.
Yeah.
Even the Italians. Even the French elections.
The Greeks.
I mean, no, but the thing is, election is the way that we express in a democratic system.
Yeah.
So, and if people are perceiving in a way that migration, or better saying, the way that currently we are dealing with migration, it has been an issue. So I think it should be included in the European Prelude, and we also can make an argument for being connected with the right-wing wave.
I would personally include these two separately as well as the EU Elections Prelude. Because for me, the EU Elections Prelude kind of summarizes more the political maneuvering going on ahead of elections in this calendar year. Because I don't want to look a bit too far ahead, because we are reflecting on 2023. So for me, the EU Elections Prelude is more the merry-go-round of the recently departed center-right and left-leaning leaders trying to get their big jobs in Brussels, von der Leyen clinging on wherever she can, Stoltenberg, all the little merry-go-round of leaders there. So I think great points. I would personally think, and I'm going to bring in Julien's voice, which isn't present, I think we would kind of keep these two on the list. Because you've been overruled, Joao. Where would you place these two? I'll give you the honor of that.
Okay, the Inflation Cost Act and the migration?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I try to merge inflation cost with other topics because they are connected with
Cheating
other topics.
is what I call that.
No, it's not. It's not cheating. It's actually the truth.
But where would you place this in their current bracket right here?
I mean, that's difficult to say. I mean,
at you.
you are asking me to dismantle everything that I did. Basically, is that it?
To step on his values, actually.
No, it's pretty much like.
I'm gonna place them 1 and 2, a 2 and 3 right now, and we can move them around unless we have.
Okay.
Are you okay with this?
I am, of course. Like, in my opinion, I just had them both one step up. I really don't see right now what's a bigger topic in Europe.
My number one, and Julien's number one as well, is the Russian-Ukraine war. Do we think it deserves a place on this list in the top 4?
An argument can certainly be made. But
because I think it's been the dominant, especially in the first half of the year. It was all about the developments, the cold winter, the Battle of Bakhmut, all the developments kind of being frozen over, and everybody waiting for the June offensive, which came, but not to the big bang we expected. And then coupled in the trends of support to Russia, or support to Ukraine, support to Ukraine, kind of diminishing along the political rhetoric. I mean, I know Europe's committed to being strong on that front, but we see our American allies being a bit more, light-footed in their approach here. I think it's been a dominant political discourse that's been reverberating, and I think it has to be in the top 3 personally, if not number 1.
I mean, the more you individualize the topics, the easier it becomes for Russia and Ukraine to be on the top 1 because it encompasses most of the things or most of the issues that we are dealing right now. The thing is, okay, if you want to scale them down, inflation, if we are looking carefully, inflation and cost of living and migration are perhaps 2 of the hottest topics if we are going to elections nowadays.
Right.
That's how the governments are going to be judged mostly.
But we're in 2023.
We're still in 2023.
Okay.
Even with the elections that we had during this year.
I would agree.
I mean,
right.
if you go, for instance, for the Finnish elections or
Right.
the Swedes or Sweden, I mean, you see that those were, especially migration was a core issue. And we can understand also that this is going to play a role next year. It can potentially be for those remaining in power that do not address the issues. It can be like a yellow card in the European elections.
I think what I'm getting at, and correct me if I'm jumping the gun here, Nikos, and I'll let you do your little Ukraine blurb, because in the past episodes you've always had your 5 minutes of rallying support for Ukraine.
So if you want to keep it separated like that, I would have to say that perhaps the order that you are thinking about is the correct one for me.
So I'll put inflation and cost of living right now tentatively at number 1, and migration at number 2. Unexpected for me, but I think I approve. And then I'm moving up Russia-Ukraine war to number 3. Nikos, thoughts on how this progressed throughout the year?
All right. First of all, Slava Ukraina. We will never stop until supporting Ukraine until all of the Ukrainian territory is liberated. That being said, as we look at the entirety of 2023, I think putting, for instance, Russia-Ukraine war as the top topic would be too Brussels-centric. Think a little bit about the average, not the average voter, the average person in Europe right now. What are their most pressing concerns? And I don't mean what are their most pressing concerns on Twitter/X or Instagram. I mean, what are their most important problems? Number 1, their most important problems are how are they going to make ends meet for the month? How are they going to pay for the bills? How will they keep up with the supermarket shopping list, which just keeps getting inflated and inflated and inflated week in, week out, month in, month out? So in that extent, obviously, the Russia-Ukraine war has decreased in terms of the prevalence in the state of thinking, I think, of an average European citizen. That being said, we must not forget that there is still an ongoing war on European soil, and on a country that the Commission recommended should start accession negotiations. So it could be that the Council grants it in December. So we're talking about a country that is negotiating to become a member of the EU that is currently in a state of full-on war. A lot of things about because we put the label that it's the Russia-Ukraine war, but there's so many things to it. You've put Ukraine reconstruction as a separate topic, but it's not, because what are we trying to reconstruct here? We're trying to reconstruct a country, Ukraine, that's essentially been carpet bombed by another country for the whim of only one mad dictator, nothing else. That's literally it. And young people on both sides, I might add, are needlessly dying, but that's what makes the fight of Ukrainian civilians and the armed forces so important. But we must also think that the war has entered a stalemate, and that's not good for public support. The offensive, I think people had too high expectations, and I remember the Ukrainian military leaders adjusting them, because they don't have air superiority. They unfortunately don't have the willingness, number one, and the stupidity to just throw wave after wave after wave of human lives across bunkers and across walls and across fortified positions. And unfortunately, it takes time. Now, if we start talking about the nitty-gritty of the war, there are a lot of good things, places where Ukraine has made advancements on the lines that were set from the 2014 conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But in terms of priority, I think, and just I want to indicate that this is the top three that I put. I agree completely with this top three from a European perspective.
I didn't even notice that. I
did.
Okay, I feel bad about that. I didn't want to give you too
and
much joy.
I did not press for this.
I can see you sitting back way too calmly there. Joao, and any final thoughts on Russia, Ukraine, or do you want to pivot into maybe another conflict or a series of conflicts you want to see on this list?
No, one of the things that was that I said, I don't know if it was in the last year's top 10, 2022 top 10 list, or if it was on our predictions, but I refer as the Russian-Ukrainian war as something that could spill over into other type of potential conflicts. And I think in a way we are already assisting to some of these situations because of the influence that Russia still has by its own or by sometimes its proxy members or kind of institutions like Wagner that have influence in other regions of the world and that are creating turmoil and undermining the lives of people, of civilians there, but of course undermining afterwards the lives of civilians in the European Union, for instance. Hot topic still. I mean, as Niko said, and I make his words mine, we still should keep up and continue supporting Ukraine. The thing that we need to think about from last year is, are we actually doing enough? And in some cases, some of the so-proclaimed Ukrainian allies, although they never abandoned them, but they might have found in some other conflicts a way to, let's say, not provide enough or prioritize other type of conflicts rather than Ukraine. And we are going to speak of one which I think it could make very easily like top 5, top 4, which I would speak about the Israeli-Hamas conflict.
Let's make the pivot. I think that's a perfect point to do it. This was the unknown, I think, of 2023. no one expected this, because we did have last year a localized and sort of short but intense conflict between the two sides, but this time it exploded into a full-blown war.
I could agree, but I do feel like any year could have been the year of Israel-Hamas conflict. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, actually, I don't agree. I think this is actually a good year, because it's the 50th anniversary, and actually it happened more or less in the same days as the Yom Kippur War.
Fair enough.
So
see, what I perceived as the impetus for this was more of the Israeli relations with Saudi Arabia, etc.
Yeah, but exactly. This might just be, just an unhappy coincidence, because one of the things that the Israeli-Hamas conflict, I think it has been like very overshadowed, is what lies deep within this conflict this time around. Okay, what are the geopolitical consequences? What was at stake? What happened? What this conflict is preventing from happening in that area? And just a very quick take on that. There's been negotiating, as far as I'm aware, even during Trump's mandate as a president, a type of agreement or between the Israelis and the Saudis, and this will completely reshape the security and defense architecture of the region. And of course, the biggest enemy of both sides is still Iran. So this triangle was also very important for this equation of this current conflict. So what was at stake was Saudi Arabia could potentially being recognize Israel, and Israel soften its positions. Of course, like this type of negotiations will always have to have the Palestinian solution as something to be happen in the agreement. So we could have been assisting, if some things could actually have been evolved, to Israel softening up its position on the Palestinian Authority. But the thing is, Iran knew that most likely if this was coming to happen and they formed this coalition, geopolitically they will be in tatters. And also, they knew that whenever solution would have to come, the Palestinians would have to be involved. So this thing has been cooked out in August. I don't know if you guys read the headlines back then. In August, things were being cooked in Syria between Iran, Hamas, and other Muslim movements in the Gaza Strip, and also they say that Hezbollah was also involved. And we do not know, but I positively think that Russia in some way also sanctioned the situation in order for this attacks to happen. And this completely broke the architecture that was being cooked. Because nowadays with the conflict, the Saudis cannot say, hey, let's be pals.
Let money be money.
They cannot do that. And so as long as this still remains, no architecture design and no alliance, because ultimately this was what was going to do. The US was planning to make like 2 bilateral defense agreements, one with Saudi Arabia and one with Israel. They would not be connected, so the two countries, but in the way they would through the US. And this would completely reshape the security in the region.
So given all this, keeping an eye on the clock, where do we put the Israel-Hamas conflict? Because for me personally, and I will say, I don't talk about the Israel-Hamas conflict because I don't think I can add anything constructive to debate here. What I've observed sitting here in Brussels is it reflects, from my perspective, more on the poorness at times of EU foreign policy. And I think looking at other conflicts, for instance, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, beyond the geopolitical implications, that's kind of what I see the implications for Europe as. And I think it's something interesting to point out. Regardless, where do we want to put this on the list? Because I had it nearer to 7th. I've seen some of you had it nearer to 4th.
Yep. I just would like to make one last point quickly, very shortly. One of the biggest implications that this conflict can actually have is exactly the same thing that it happened in 73, which is a major oil crisis. And just think about the situation. If you are telling people that inflation and cost of living, which affects citizens and business, is already an issue, imagine what happened if the Arabic states, not wanting to join the war, use their hard instruments like their leverage on oil to force the conflict, or to force an end of the conflict, or to use it as kind of a sanction mechanism.
Yeah, but let's also keep this pinned in 2023 because I think we're really focusing or fixating on the importance of these topics for the year to come, which I think is great analysis. I'm really enjoying this conversation. But in the whole list of things that happened in 2023, where do we rank this? Nikos, I give you the honor.
4.
4? What do you think, Joao?
I agree with him.
I would personally have kept it a little lower, but then again, I also don't have anything constructive to say in this conflict, so I'll refrain.
Yeah, but as a great man once said to me, you've been overruled.
Great. Well, I guess that brings it to me with the magic mouse, which I've been holding all along. I want to quickly draw something that I saw in 3 of our other lists and has been on my mind a lot as somebody working in tech. The AI Act. And all of the AI, the huge bubble of noise surrounding these trends going on. Do we think that the AI Act deserves to be one of the top stories of 2023? Which I do think it does, and maybe even in the top 5. Nikos, and any perspectives?
I would say digital regulation, if you can sort of put it under that umbrella, has absolutely been, because you have AI puncturing in a way the commercial landscape. And when I mean commercial, I mean just regular people, not commercial as in massive conglomerates and companies using it. So now anyone can go to ChatGPT and ask them to write their essay for them, right? But at the same time, so you have the AI Act, but you also have the Digital Services Act. You have
Digital Markets.
The Digital Markets Act, the Code of Practice on Disinformation, the foreign interference and manipulation actions that the Commission and that the EU is taking. So I think this is part of a broader umbrella that needs to be taken into account. What scares me the most is the rate at which, unfortunately, regulation is too slow to keep up with this technology.
Do you think that there's any, because I know we speak a lot about the Brussels effect, do you think that what we've been seeing in the last year has been reflecting good or poorly? I phrased that poorly. How has been reflecting on the EU's regulatory ambitions right now? Because with the AI Act, what we've been seeing is it's being stuck in the trialogues and being tossed around. And people have been kind of almost surpassing it in the international, like the Hiroshima process, stuff like that. Do we think that the current wave of digital regulation is, progressing well enough from the EU perspective? Or is that a question for beyond the scope of this room?
I think we don't have time for
fair enough.
For that.
And please leave your perspective in the comments below.
Definitely, but just a very small take on that. I mean, the European Union has its own framework of procedures on addressing regulation.
Yeah.
And we try to do it in the most transparent way possible, encompassing all the institutions. And it takes time. That's the thing. And me coming from DG Grow, so we are talking about innovation, industry, and everything related to artificial intelligence. We need to understand that innovation in all of these things, they completely come beforehand and act faster than regulation itself.
Right.
It will always be like this. The thing is, what we want to achieve from this regulation. And in this, we need to understand that there are basically 2 perspectives in confront. A more EU-centric, value-based approach, and a more market approach that our competitors have, like the US and China.
And if you've read Anu Bradford's new book, Digital Empire, she also argues with the third approach, the Chinese one, the more authoritarian approach. So I like how we're all having the same ideas.
Yeah, so...
Sorry to steal your train.
No, it's okay. So the thing is the major issue with the AI is it is a reality, but it will depend on who will actually be able to control that reality. Yeah. Okay, so this is where regulation plays a role. And just to throw it a small thing, AI is part of our lives, is going to be even more in the future, and business nowadays are telling, they're a little bit fearful that too much regulation may hamper their activities, may hamper the capacity for European business to build up on innovation and scaling up. And we can reach to a point where we cannot compete with American or Chinese champions.
Yep.
Which means that they will dominate the market.
I think that's a great segue into a different topic, but before we do that, quickly, where do we put digital regulation as an umbrella bucket? Joao, you have the last word?
I have the last word. A lot of
Unless
responsibility.
you feel strongly.
I would say 5.
5?
I would go for 6, but it's fine.
Let's go 5 and we'll see what comes out of it.
Okay.
And if anybody has a copy of the Anu Bradford new book, I've been trying to snatch a free copy at all these events she's been going to, and I haven't gotten one yet. So hit me up, please. I also want to quickly spotlight the Inflation Reduction Act topic, which Julien had in his top 10, around the 6 mark, if I remember correctly. And I think this speaks a bit more towards the whole competitiveness of Europe. Because what I've been seeing the undercurrents of a lot of debates around the policy circles here in Brussels, and maybe it's not all across Europe, this conversation, it's very much wondering how competitive is Europe in the markets nowadays. And we really saw it being brought to the forefront in March, in February, with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Green Deal Industrial Plan, the whole fiasco around that. Should this be in our top 10? Should we tentatively stick it to the bottom and knock it off later?
I think there was a period where there were a lot of intense discussions on it, largely because we claim in Brussels that it caught us a bit off guard. So just to comment that the Inflation Reduction Act is something that the US adopted essentially to incentivize and subsidize its own industry, specifically in like the more green tech area and sectors. But at the same time, I think if you look at the second half of the year, it's completely tumbled into a point where I don't remember the last time I heard a European politician talking about the GDIP, as they like to call it.
Although I have to disagree on one thing. This is the clear example that this topic, when you read it separately, it loses a lot of importance. But when you place it on the bigger picture of international competition between our two blocks, for instance, you were talking about the subsidizing of the industry and energy. Lately, a lot of EU politicians, even high-level EU politicians, are completely fearful of the amount of energy-intensive industries that we are losing to the US. Because of this type of attitudes, and this will mean that it will have economic impact, not only in terms of production for us, but of course in terms of jobs.
Should we leave it on? I'm going to tentatively dump it at number 10, because I do think it's an important issue, but we'll knock it off probably later on, and I do think we have to get a bit quicker of a move on if we want to finish within the hour.
I want, here I think we need to mention climate and energy, because I think if there's one thing that 2023 will be memorable for in Europe, it will be the year that the political establishment started fighting back against the EU's climate agenda.
Because I was going to mention this. Yeah, because it's very much been, this year hasn't been a positive year for climate. Because I think every year previously we're like, oh, we're getting new agreements on climate deals. We're progressing forward in certain ways. But we've seen here a bit of that backlash.
We, and when I mean we, I mean humanity, not Europe, China, US, humanity. We are not implementing. I'm going to say anything, take that with a pinch of salt. Because unfortunately, the tragedy of the commons says that we can cut all our emissions. Europe can tomorrow be net zero. It still won't be enough, because that's not how climate works. China and the US and India and Russia and everybody else could be doing whatever they want. And then we tell ourselves that we are trying to fight climate change, and we are. But you can't fight this battle alone. It's just not possible. Add to that the fact that the Russian-Ukraine war, as well as other regional conflicts, also here I'm going to mention Azerbaijan, are exacerbating the supply, number one, the cost. Number two, also you have OPEC that essentially is profiteering of people's misery when it comes to climate and to energy. Sorry, not to climate. But I look at this together because you don't have climate action without energy. And the truth is that the war taught us, like Joao said, a very valuable lesson that at the end of the day, people want their houses warm. People want to be able to cook. People want to be able to have warm water. People want to be able to power the companies that are bringing them literally everything. And I mean everything. And now we are very much realizing that, well, if we're going to shoot ourselves in the leg, we're going to lose that competitiveness that we have in so many industries, like the automotive, aerospace, and we're also shooting ourselves in the other leg in industries where they're not still to the extent that they can be global conglomerates or competitive on a global scale, but which we are working towards getting there. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, there must be a balance at this time because yes, it's a very, very difficult dilemma between making the climate adoption now, but at the same time, everybody needs to do it.
So what I'm understanding, there's a bit of a darker story on climate this year, as I aptly chose this picture about more of that skepticism, more of the denial, coupled with that, that need for action. It's a potent story. Where does it, because I know you had this climate energy topic a bit higher, and we should rush through this a bit more quickly. Should it be above digital regulation?
A bit higher is an understatement. I mean, I place economy and climate on the top because the two things are completely intertwined. Because the reality is, if climate is faltering or losing traction, it's because people are giving, or governments are giving priority to economy, to actual practical needs, And for instance, Niko mentioned something that I think is very illustrative of the situation. He spoke about the automotive industry. It's pretty much about climate as it is about economy. And what is happening nowadays? For us to push for a green agenda in the automotive industry, we have a lot of legislation. We have the legislation like the Euro 7 and all of that, but we don't control the supply chains. We don't control the semiconductors, and we don't control the raw materials necessary to make, for instance, the batteries. And where do they come from? Who controls them? China mostly.
Well,
and nowadays they are completely flooding our market, our automotive market, with cars that we suspect, or the industry is suspecting, that they are being their cost is being dumped. So basically they are subsidizing not only they control the supply chains, but they are subsidizing the production of their cars and injecting into our market, which will mean that we are losing competitiveness. Our companies are losing competitiveness. So this is climate and energy is pretty much an economic issue. They are completely intertwined. Now that you are mentioning, since you merged,
a segue now to the immediate next topic, and it's quite obvious.
Yeah, but before we do, we're placing climate and energy at 6 tentatively and moving right into.
Yes.
No, I would. You made a question. You asked if we would place it like digital regulation or climate and energy in 5th.
I would switch them as well.
I would switch them.
I'll let you guys take the wheel on this because I am the host with no opinions. So, okay, China and the world. Let's do a quick rant. We have like 10 minutes left, so we should kind of nail through this.
Let's do like 1 minute.
Yeah.
I want Joao to start.
You want me to start? Let's do 1 minute. I want Joao to start.
I could give a quick few words to it.
No. I think.
Be concise, huh?
No, I will try to be concise. What you mean? You've been the guy that's been talking a lot.
Kicking the leg out.
China in the world. It's no secret. We have been discussing this a lot. How much China has become important as a world actor. In many ways, it's more than a regional power. It's a worldwide power. For the power that it can project and influence that it can take, not only in our economies, but also in the way that it controls places that EU countries used to formally control or have influence over. So China nowadays, by the fact that they are capable of exerting such an influence, especially in controlling supply chains and raw materials, is something that leads us, and you remember very well the discussion of what relationship we want to have, we, the West in general, want to have with China. That decoupling and detaching thing. I'm not gonna enter into that. But the thing is, how much we want to be linked with China.
Yeah.
How far do we want to take globalization? Do we need to take a different approach in a more trying to have more of an autonomous approach within the European economy? Promote even further the integration of the single market. Try to have a different approach, and this is very important, in a way that we do agreements with other states, especially states in Africa that have a lot of natural resources that we need for our own digital and green transition.
Yeah, and on that note, we've seen a bunch of milestones in the last year because of this. Foreign investment screening mechanism. We've seen the Economic Security Act. We've seen more discussion of the CHIPS Act, and I've heard about a bunch of skepticism of even the utilization, even talking about that. And of course, it was almost preluded or capped off, depending how you look at it, by Macron's and von der Leyen's overlapping little visit to China, which took home, I think, a few really different messagings. So I think 7th is a nice place. Nikos, you graciously gave up your time to speak on this. Or are you taking that back?
I'm very happy to move on, and I think
wrap it all up. Yeah,
I agree with what Joao said. I'm just gonna say that about China, and we need to be very careful what parameters and what factors we use when we consider and analyze our relationship. Is it more economic or is it more human rights and geopolitics? But then I think, you know what, we forget that 2023 was the year that we almost had a coup in Russia.
Yes, because I had this box of Russia's internal stability, which does relate to China, but given all of Chinese new investments and the web is closing in around Russia with the Chinese connection, which I think is kind of well deserved. But I will say I will give my top news consumed moment in 2023 to the Prigozhin coup. I was glued to Twitter for an entire day.
I was glued to all these pages I follow on Instagram and on what's that other social media that has. Never mind, I don't remember.
26 you said you were? Sorry.
Yes, I agree that kind of like the White House said about Putin when he essentially, let's say, defeated the coup and killed Prigozhin. Well, no, sorry. The plane, there was an engine failure.
Yeah, it was an unsuspecting
crash.
Nobody could have seen it coming.
It was, or yes, I'm not sure at this point. But I will say that stronger in the short term, weaker in the long term. First of all, you can just see the people that Putin is hanging out with geopolitically. His buddies have become Iran and the DPRK, Kim Jong-un. If those are the kind of friends that you want to have geopolitically, that's certainly your prerogative. At the same time, it's very important that we put Russia below China, because Putin has selected, with the fact that he's chosen a very path-dependent route down the fact that he's not willing to relent on Ukraine. It is making it very clear that essentially there is a very, very real possibility, and I think very high possibility, that Russia becomes essentially an oligarchy of China.
Yep.
When they start using their money to...
I definitely agree, and I think that's going to be really fascinating to see come through the years. But before we put this on the list, and I'm sure I'm not entirely aligned that this is bigger than the other stories we've list, and I want to pull a few attention to a few other ones in the last two slots for the last few minutes we have. NATO enlargement, I thought, was a huge theme this year. It might not look like on the surface, but NATO did expand, and they will expand again with Sweden joining next year, hopefully.
Let's call it enlarge.
We are waiting, right?
Yes.
Certain countries, take very thorough
But
democratic processes.
they did, eventually prove. But regardless, moving on to maybe another thing we should touch on, the U.S. Republicans.
Actually, I want another one, and I left it for last because I want to talk about it. No, Russia we keep.
Let's quickly go.
Because
highlight.
I don't agree that it should be there.
Yeah, because I think there's a few other ones like I wanted to pull out as well. Africa's coups, or coups in general, which had a great impact as well, maybe from the situation in Russia, which we were implicitly supported a lot of time. Maybe the EU Elections Prelude, which we hinted at, maybe it should be on here as well, the merry-go-round. Ukraine reconstruction, personally, I think, at least in my work, it's been something that I've been looking at a lot, so maybe it's been more in my mind. And I guess the US, Republican Party and the whole elections coming up. Of these themes, what are we including here? Does Russia deserve to be here? Joao, I give you the word.
In my opinion, no. For the next, I'm gonna make it shorter. For the last two spots, I would place.
He can't get both.
No.
I'll give you the two, and I'll give you the two, and then we'll discuss because we don't have much time.
I would place in 8. I would place the African coups.
Yeah, tentatively.
And I would place in 9th the NATO enlargement.
Okay. Personally, I would be okay with that. What's your argument?
So I don't mind if it's 10th, but I would put Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and I want to make a broader argument here. I agree with Africa coups and NATO enlargement, and generally the ongoing pushback in democracy in Africa, not just coup d'etats, but the most dangerous time for regional conflicts is when people are not looking. For instance, Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Palestine, and God knows whatever other
Serbia and Kosovo,
whatever other conflict is brewing. And this is where I have to pay homage to the fact that I'm Greek. This is what I fear, for instance, as just a young Greek person, that when things really start getting dangerous geopolitically, autocrats, demagogues, and dictators look for that easy win, that lightning offensive, kind of like Azerbaijan did in Nagorno-Karabakh, because if they did a special 3-day military operation, quote unquote, because that's what Russia tried to do, except it completely backfired and exploded in their faces. Now, what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, it continues to be prevalent. Why? Because as soon as the Israel-Hamas conflict began, we had Azerbaijan making demands that they want Armenia to cede more territory. They want to connect their newly acquired territories. And here we see the problem of not just Taiwan, but also Greece, Cyprus, and a million other small micro conflicts that are brewing and ongoing.
So I'd like that argument, and I think that African coups kind of speaks a bit to that. I know it doesn't encompass the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, but I felt like this is a bit more politically salient, and it gives a bit more homage to a part of the world we don't speak about enough.
Politically and economically, the Africa coups.
Yes. So as another philosopher akin to your Greek ancestors once said, "You've been overruled." But yeah. Should we keep NATO enlargement on here as well, or are there any are we happy with this final list of 2023? I personally will take it. I know there'll be some eyebrows that we include migration over the right-wing wave.
I would remove competitiveness and put the elections.
Joao, thoughts? I am willing to do it because there has been in our own lists beforehand, and paying homage to Julien, he also had elections in there. So.
My interpretation, I wouldn't change it now, because the interpretation that I made in the beginning was by combining all of those things into the prelude of the elections. Because if we strip away the political debate and the movements that are behind, what is actually left for the prelude? Not much.
For me, the prelude, you're thinking about it too broadly, though. Prelude is just the whole media attention being paid to who's going to step up again.
But again, you don't see that much. Whereas I honestly believe that European competitiveness is something that it should remain in the agenda, and it was in the agenda this year, a lot.
it's true. In the first half of the year.
Okay.
I think this I would say, I would hazard to guess it might have dominated the agenda more than this did, more substantially.
Okay.
Also, speaking of dominating agendas, this Qatari thing fell off a cliff. But that's all I'm going to say on that.
I'm not even going to touch that.
Are our feathers not too ruffled by this conversation? Do we think that we have something we're willing to put, the BRUBBLE stamp on, which we already have? But
Slava Ukraina, long live Europe, and I can live with the list.
Any final reflections, Joao?
Pretty much comfortable with the list as we came up. I don't know if Julien will actually agree, but actually I'm curious. Let's go down and see what he put and see how much he got right. Right, I mean how much.
So he got 1, he got 2.
Let's just describe it for the listeners, because he kind of hinted at the same top 3, except in different orders. Because he had right-wing wave, which I consider a bit synonymous with migration, inflation, cost of living as 2 and 3, Russia, Ukraine as 1. So yeah.
AI Act, which we sort of renamed into digital regulation.
Exactly.
Israel-Hamas conflict. The Inflation Reduction Act, which we also renamed to European competitiveness. So he did have the Polish elections, which we did not.
Touch upon. Despite, Donald Tusk allegedly being the most influential man in Europe, if you saw the political headlines, which I don't know if I agree with, but going on.
He also had the 2024 EU Election Prelude, Ukrainian reconstruction, and at the last spot, Croatia joining the Euro and the Schengen.
Do we think Croatia should be given some more applause? Because this is somewhat of a European success story, no?
Surely.
Should we have a positive story in our top few? Because again, it's very bleak, like it was last year.
But was it a top 10 story?
Honestly,
yeah.
But I don't. I think
much props to them, but not top 10.
There's one thing that, although if we still have a little bit of time, that I would like to see.
I don't think we do we?
No, because how much does our top 10 this year compares with the last years?
Yeah, let's give it a glance.
Okay, should we quickly say what it was?
Yeah, well, we looked over in the beginning a second ago, but I think we need to be wrapping up right now. Okay. But let's discuss that on the way out. Leave in the comments below. I'll flash on the screen at the end, and let us say goodbye. Thank you for coming out, Nicholas, Joao, and I'm hoping that you'll like, subscribe, and do all the good stuff.
See you next time.
See you guys.